Hi, I'm Adam Lane Smith, an attachment specialist, and today I want to talk to you about grief, specifically complicated grief, because there's different ways to grieve, and sometimes people get stuck. By the end of this video, you should understand complicated grief and how to break through that cycle to find healing. To start with, I want to discuss what the definition of grief is as it relates to the American Psychiatric Association's definitions in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 allots up to 2 weeks for what's called bereavement before a person is able to be diagnosed with depression. Now, does this mean you get 2 weeks to grieve? That's up for debate. No, not really, but a person can be diagnosed and then medicated after that. That's how our system kind of works. 2 weeks is the standard through which they expect you should at least return to some semblance of functioning after you have lost a loved one. Is 2 weeks enough? It depends on the circumstance. And that is exactly where complicated grief comes in. Now, grief is our brain figuring out, what is my life going to be like without this person? Can I continue? What damage has been done, and how do I manage that damage so that I am not lost and alone for the rest of my life? That's the brain's trying to figure that out. You miss them, and you're also trying to figure out how to manage that damage from that loss. The brain tends to be pretty selfish, and that's okay in this case. What we need to do is figure out where you're at in that grief cycle. So if you are able to process quickly, that person died, but I have these systems in place, here's what happened in their death, it happened, it was sad, but we will move on with our lives. That might be what they would call, of all things, standard grief. That's a more typical grief expression. We've all heard of the stages of grief you can go through. Some people go through them, some people don't. Some people have different experiences. Don't put too much stock in the 5 expressions of grief, 5 stages. They can help to understand, but really what's happening is your brain needs to come to terms with the fact that this person is gone, and what's next? What is left? That's why we have funerals, actually, us humans. We have funerals to reconnect to the people who are here and help our brain say, here is what is left, and I'm going to be okay. That's really what that experience is for. Now, if someone that we love dies in a very complicated way, that could be suicide, it could be murder, it could be I've worked with plenty of people over the years. I was a licensed therapist for many years, and I treated people who their fiance died just prior to the wedding. I worked with people whose child died under the care of somebody else, and they felt guilty for not being there with their child. Anytime the death is complicated by some factor that adds more feelings to you, that creates guilt, it creates fear, it creates, oh no, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? Where was I? In the case of suicide, we may feel angry at the person. Then we feel guilty for feeling angry at the person. Then we feel like it's our fault. Then we feel like we didn't do enough. Then we start asking, how do I make sure this never happens again? And sometimes we don't know. What's happening is the brain has 2 different sides, and I'm not sure which way my camera's flipped, but the left side is logic and the right side is emotion. When we have these emotional events, our logical brain needs to process them to figure out what happened and how do I make sure this complicated, painful thing, never happens again. How do I make sure that never happens again? Except when we're stuck in emotion, the right side is overactivated and it drains that logical left side's ability to function. You are more emotional. So every time you hit an emotional spiral, it just churns and churns and churns and says, how do I make it better? How do I make it better? And you can't. Your logical processes are not engaged. So you, as your brain, is trying to figure out, how do I pick up my life and go on after my best friend committed suicide? Your logical brain is trying to figure that out, but your emotional brain is completely out of control, saying, I can't believe this happened. Oh no, this is so painful. You can't get that connect, which is why many people, when they have complicated grief after a complicated death, they do not grieve fully. They may go into shock. They may grieve, what's called overgrieve, or they are crushed and they can't move. And that's almost a form of shock as well. Your brain is overwhelmed and says, I cannot handle this. So sometimes it will turn features off. It will turn off your ability to grieve. It will disconnect from those memories. It will push them away. As time goes by, sometimes years, if you have not properly grieved an event, your brain will form powerful negative associations whenever it remembers that event or that person and start to push it away and push it away and push it away. You also haven't incorporated the lessons that your logical brain would use, so that person's no longer a part of your daily life with the lessons you pulled from them, and you can't remember their good memories because those cause pain. You will start to lose that person. And that will create a second cascade of grief because now you're losing them all over again and you don't know why. That's the cycle of complicated grief. The good news is that when your brain reaches a point where it believes it is ready to grieve without dying, without killing you, without going psychotic, without losing everything, when your brain reaches a point where it understands, okay, I am ready to handle this grief. I have things in place. People take care of me. My life circumstances are mostly okay, and I'm in a place where I can break down and let this happen. You will experience a second or third cascade of grief. It's usually more condensed. It's usually a week or two. It usually gets really bad for a couple of days and then trends upward. Every day you get better and better and better, and then you will be better than you've ever been. But to get there, you need to get all the other obstacles out of the way to help your brain reach a point where it has enough resources and stability to then be able to process the grief that just happened. Because logical left side of the brain, you need to restore logical left functioning. If you are constantly at a deficit with your emotional brain spiking all the time from not only that complicated death, but many life events that have flowed after it, you will never fully process it. To get it back, you have to restore that logical functioning. And that can come about in a number of ways. Therapy can be one. This is why sometimes therapy makes things worse before it gets better, because you come in emotional, and then over time you start to restore logical functioning, and then you get enough logical functioning that now you can process all those horrible, painful memories and sadnesses and griefs from years past, and you crash again. And it seems like therapy has made it worse. What's happening is you're on a delay. Your stress, your shock is all now worn off because your brain says, I need to process these things or they'll kill me. Now I'm at a place where I can process them. I'm going to take it. And unfortunately, we don't get to choose that. Our brain decides when that happens. It's just an unfortunate natural process. But our brain is selfish and it picks that moment to protect us from the worst of the effects. So how do you get there? Therapy can be one for some people. There's a special treatment called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming. You do the eyes back and forth. It's incredible for some people, for traumas. It can actually force that logical connection without having too much of that grief process. That can be helpful for some people. Progressive muscle relaxation continuously every day can be helpful in some types. Working out, physical exercise, prolonged physical discomfort, talking with your loved ones so that your brain says, okay, this is what I have left. That's what a funeral is supposed to be for, but sometimes people don't have a funeral, or sometimes they don't go to the funeral, or the funeral's not enough. Sometimes we need extended connection conversations with family members. That tells your brain, I have things left. That person wasn't the only person I have, and I need to remember I have my sister, I have my nephew, whatever it might be. Your brain will build that system back in. You need to reduce that stress load on the brain through physical exercise, through therapy and talking it out, through connecting with people. And eventually, as that brain redistributes back to a logical side, you will start processing that grief logically. That often, if it's complicated grief on a delay, that is when, boom, everything hits and you nosedive and you say, what have I done? It is worse than ever. This is terrible. I'm never going to get better. It will feel like that for a couple of days. Recognize that, because that can be a dangerous time for some people. You can talk to the people around you and say, hey, I think this is what's going on. I saw this dude on YouTube and he told me about this grief. But that needs to happen. Because when you come out of that, your logical brain processes those memories and says, okay, here's the lessons I want to pull from that complicated death. Here's how I want that person to be incorporated into my daily life. I want to teach my kids these important lessons so they don't disconnect from the family like that person did. I want to love my spouse more fully and completely because my brother's spouse, my sister-in-law killed herself. I want to, whatever it might be, I'm going to take care of our family and remember those lessons and make that person's legacy the health and well-being of our family. So that way, that person is with you every day. And now that you've processed those painful memories, it no longer causes the emotional spikes when you have good memories of that person. You'll shift from bad memories to good memories and have more of them. That person will start to come back into your brain, most likely, and you will feel them present again in your mind, in your heart, in your life. You won't lose them a second time. They will still be there. Now, those memories may fade a little bit over time. They might, but they won't fade as hard as they were when you felt like you were losing that person. That's a very different thing. Those negative associations and the shock can do that. This will keep that person front and center in your life if you want them to, in a good way, not in a bad way. This is how you deal with complicated grief and break through it. I hope this has been helpful to you, to anyone who's out there grieving, or to anyone who knows somebody who's grieving. Please, if you have any questions or any thoughts, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear about it. And if this has been helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Thank you. Till next time.